Hello and welcome to our comment writing workshop, our first attempt at something like this. My name's Mickey Ryan from Portland, Oregon, and I'm a member of the Cascade Volcanoes broadband of the Great Old Broads for Wilderness. And I think probably everyone on here knows about what the organization is, but it's a national grassroots organization led by women that engages and inspires activism to preserve and protect wilderness and public land. I'm saying that because we are recording this and we hope that we can send it around to get even more people commenting and learning about this issue for future advocacy. The Broads have been involved, at least the ones in the Pacific Northwest, for a couple years on this issue, but it has been a very long fight. Even though I've lived near the Columbia for 35 years, I have learned a lot in the last couple years and realized that how little I knew. For instance, the lawsuits that this comment period is part of have been going on for over 20 years. 5 times this EIS has been sent back by the court to the government saying you're not doing what needs to be done. So that's why, again, this commenting period is so important. Broads often do advocacy around issues like this, but usually we're doing it in a social situation, enjoying each other's company, having a glass of wine. And you know, this is what we have to do now, but it's certainly nice to see your faces and to hear your voices. So we hope to improve this and make it even more social. I think everybody can see most people's name around. We were going to do a hand raise. We can't see everybody's picture. I don't know if everybody has their video on, and certainly you don't have to have your video on. But we were going to try to get an idea of who's from what broadband and have people raise their hands and say that. So maybe everybody from Cascade Volcanoes can raise their hand. I see Doran's hand. All right. And Willamette.
Yay.
Oh, that's Kirk. So yeah, we do have some people that are on their phones, so you won't see their video. Okay, what other broadbands do we have on here?
Alaska Soils broadband.
All right.
Lake Higher Cascadia.
And Boise. I just heard Diane said she's from Boise broadband. Yeah. So great. Well, it's great to see you all on here. We're hoping tonight to answer your questions and make this somewhat interactive, just as we would if we were face to face. And we have until next Monday to submit either by email or regular mail your comments. I know people on this call have a wide range of information that they know, so we're hoping that you'll share it as we go along. You're going to hear from 2 experts tonight. Deborah Ehlers, you can see her up there. She lives on the Olympic Peninsula and has spent years working on this issue, particularly as it affects the orca population. And then Kirk, who you can't see, Schroeder, he's formerly of the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife and has worked on the issue of saving salmon his whole career. And so the 2 of them will also give you further information about themselves when they speak. You're going to hear a bit about the 4 Snake River dams tonight. You're going to hear about that they aren't really that old as I thought they were. They were done, created in the 60s and 70s, and they're not very useful to us anymore. But they are causing tremendous problems for wildlife. And we're also spending billions of dollars trying to fix those problems when the real problem is that they're there and we're stopping the wildlife. So I'm going to first turn it over to Felice Kelly, who's up on your upper left-hand screen. She is our Cascade Volcano advocacy leader, and she's also our technology wizard. And so she will talk to you about how this is going to run, how we can be as interactive as possible.
Unfortunately, I'm not much of a wizard. I'm just trying to play one, but I really appreciate everyone learning with us together as we try to move online. For those of you on computers, I'm going to use the chat box a fair bit, and I think the easiest thing might be for us to collect questions in the chat box. So right now, I'm going to put in the chat box the URL. That's the main website for submitting comments. And you may want to kind of compose your comments as we go through this. It might be the easiest way to do it. And as people talk, and at the end, I'll put up some potential bullet points for comments if you want other inspiration. You can also, if you have a question, so if you have a question, you can either stick it in the chat box. If you're on the phone, just go ahead and chime in because you don't have those options. Or there's an option to raise your hand. It should be available. If you go down to the bottom of your screen, there's a button that says participants. And if you click that, you should see a bar pop up on the right-hand side of your screen. And in that bar, there's an option to raise your hand. And if you raise your hand, we'll know that you want to chime in, and we'll try to find a break. And I'll just interrupt the conversation, wherever it seems natural, and make sure that you have a chance to chime in. But please don't feel inhibited by the format. Like we said before, we just have some folks who know a lot about this issue, but this is really going to be driven by what people want to know and how we can best shape comments from the different broadbands in the region. Is there anything else, Mickey?
No, I think that's all we need to know right now. Do people have questions right now for Felice? Okay. Then Deborah, did you want to start with some background about the orcas and the history of the issue?
Well, I'll start, and I think one thing I'm trying to do is starting to tell my story. I think it's very effective, and especially in these kinds of informal situations where we just hear from each other. So not to go back too far, but I started my career as an attorney in Idaho in the mid-1980s. And I was a business attorney, but like a lot of broads, my real passion was the wilderness. So every weekend or holidays, I'd be out backpacking or hiking or cross-country skiing or mountain biking. And lo and behold, in Idaho, after you go out, you go to have a beer in Stanley or Lowman or one of those little backcountry towns, and you see these photographs on the walls from like the 1940s and 50s of people with these giant salmon they were catching in these little mountain streams in Idaho. And so for a Virginia farm girl, I was like, what is going on here? And I knew I hadn't seen anything like that when I was out backpacking. So that's when I first started learning about the Snake River dams and their impact on salmon. Was way back in the 1980s. And so I started researching it, and I called what I was finding in the Idaho mountains the ghost salmon, where there used to be literally, hundreds of thousands, even millions of salmon that would come back to Idaho at the high elevations there. The longest trek of any salmon in the lower 48, as I understand it, 900 miles and over 6,000 feet in elevation, just amazing. So I started learning about these dams, and as Mickey said, they actually went in the 1960s and 70s, but they were authorized way back in the 1940s, 1945, as we were coming out of World War II, and quite frankly, Congress was looking for some way to keep the Army Corps folks employed, and that was the era of the giant dam building. Well, so these dams were authorized in the 1940s with a dual purpose of hydroelectricity and navigation for the barging. And right off the bat, these dams were hugely controversial. In the 1940s, in 49, the Fish and Game agencies from all the states that were involved, all Idaho, Washington, Oregon, basically said that if you put these dams in, it's going to mean the extinction of the Snake River runs of salmon. Well, it's taken, 70 plus years, but that was a very prescient prediction from the agencies in exchange for what they called low value dams for hydro. A little known thing too is that President Eisenhower thought these were boondoggles and didn't pencil out on a cost benefit basis. And he refused to sign off on any bills that funded them. So for quite a while, Ike was holding these dams hostage and they weren't going anywhere. And so Senator Magnuson from Washington did the classic backroom maneuver where he got some appropriations rider tacked on to like open the door to building the road to one of the dams, and that was all it took. And that was like 1955 when that happened. But the opposition continued fiercely, and there were a number of times when there either wasn't enough money or there was enough opposition that these dams were almost not built. But unfortunately for the salmon and the rest of the ecosystem, they were. The first one came online, that would be Ice Harbor in 1961, and they went sequentially up the river all the way to Lower Granite, which is near Clarkston, or Lewiston, Clarkston, and that was completed in 1975. Well, almost immediately, and I'm sure that Kirk can talk about this more, there was a drastic drop-off in the salmon, which had been numbering up into Chinook, for example, were about 1 million before these 4 dams were constructed coming back to Idaho. And then they were dropping off by huge factors. The turbines were killing them. And while they have fish ladders, they weren't very good. But the real problem, as you'll hear, is really the hot, stagnant pools that slow the smolts down when they come down from the mountains. They evolved for this really fast, cold current. And so there were immediate retrofitting and all kinds of things. But essentially, the agencies have always been trying to engineer their way out of a problem of these reservoirs and salmon just aren't compatible. And that's just all that it comes down to. Now, I just retired from my career in Idaho in 2016, and I moved to the Olympic Peninsula. And we were looking forward to, like, I'd been working on the reaching the 4 Lower Snake River Dam since the 1990s. I participated in 4 out of the 5 Free the Snake flotillas, been active in a variety of situations. And frankly, I was getting kind of burned out about it. I was like, oh boy, I'm going to go to the Olympic Peninsula. I'm going to go hiking in the rainforest, and I'm going to learn about orcas. And I'm going to get away from the damn dams. Well, lo and behold, the first thing I learned is that the orcas are starving. And the best orca scientists like Dr. Deborah Giles and Ken Balcom say the best thing we could do for our southern resident orcas is to breach the 4 Lower Snake River dams. So I just felt like this boomerang had been thrown and it was right back around my neck. And so I've been working on it ever since I came to the Olympic Peninsula. I founded another friend of mine, and I founded an orca advocacy group called the North Olympic Orca Pod. And we actually founded it at the time they started the scoping on this current DEIS that we'll be talking about. We started that in 2016. We put on orca suits and actually went up the Snake River to some of the hearings that the agencies had. And I can say we caused quite a stir in Lewiston and Walla Walla in our orca suits. But we stopped and had little actions at each of the dams with signs and orca suits anyway. Mm-hmm. So, the southern resident orcas, if you know anything about them, they're just wonderful, delightful, unique creatures. They're very family-oriented. Significantly for the broads, they're matriarchal society, and the grandmothers are supremely important. They were listed under the Endangered Species Act in 2005. And even though they're called killer whales, that's really a misnomer. These whales don't kill anything except salmon. They don't kill seals, unlike a lot of them. They don't kill other whales. So they really just eat salmon. When they were listed in 2005, there were 88 of them. And NOAA projected that they should recover approximately 2.3% per year to be recovered, which would mean by now, 2020, we should be up to about 120 of the southern resident orcas. Well, we're down to 72, so it's clear the population is crashing. They've had tremendous difficulties in reproducing. You probably saw the tragic story about Tahlequah pushing her dead calf around. And the scientists like Dr. Giles and Ken Balcom, as I mentioned, who've been studying for decades, say that the biggest problem is lack of adequate food. They're starving, so that affects their health. It also affects their reproductive success. And they have actually put out a recent scientific paper, and I think Felice has the site, she can send that out or post it or whatever, but it summarizes why these scientists say that the best thing we can do to recover our southern resident orca population is to breach the 4 Lower Snake River dams. Now, a lot of people say, but aren't these orcas in Puget Sound? I hear this a lot, is these are often called Puget Sound orcas, and they really aren't. In the summer months, they would be in Puget Sound a lot, especially off of San Juan Island. That's where a lot of the whale watching boats would operate. But even historically, they would be out in the open ocean in the Pacific, ranging all the way from above northern Vancouver Island down south of Monterey Bay. So the orcas know the way to San Jose because they're out looking for salmon everywhere along the West Coast. So really a more appropriate name would be the West Coast orcas. And I've noticed that the Center for Biological Diversity, for example, who's been instrumental in getting them listed and getting their critical habitat expanded, calls them West Coast orcas. So I think that's a good summary. But in where our comments will come in is the best available science says that breaching the 4 lower Snake River dams gives the southern resident orcas a meaningful chance for recovery. So that's a key point to emphasize. And I'll be glad to entertain any specific questions or concerns that people have about the orcas, but I don't want to belabor this. I could actually talk about orcas all night, so I better stop here.
Deborah, could you just repeat that kind of last, like if someone was to put in like just a bullet point for their comment, what the most succinct way to put that would be?
Yes.
I'll just mute myself. Oh wait. Sorry, I think you accidentally got muted. Can you repeat that?
I shouldn't be muted. Okay. Best available science says that breaching the 4 lower Snake River dams gives southern resident orcas a meaningful chance for recovery. And that's because it would essentially produce up to 1 million more Chinook coming back within just a few years. And these orcas need a lot more Chinook salmon. And that's really the only source where we can get a big supply coming back into the ecosystem soon.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question. I'm just coming into this issue. So does the DEIS really address orcas or really only the salmon in terms of the recovery?
Yeah, it does address the orcas, but it says that breaching the dams would have a negligible impact. And so that's a key point we want to say there. And our Broad's comments went into great detail on that, is that the DEIS just says that breaching the dams would have a negligible impact on the orcas, whereas the scientists who've been studying them for decades with PhDs say that breaching the Snake River dams, in fact, is the best chance of recovery. And I might add too, if you've seen the film Dammed to Extinction, that's a key theme in that film, and I recommend it if you haven't.
It's the movie is available on, is it on YouTube now? And I think it costs, you can rent it for 48 hours. I think it's $4.99 or something. And we can get that link to you too, to YouTube.
Yeah, it's a very powerful movie.
What's the name of the movie again?
Damned to Extinction.
Okay, Deborah, do you want us to move to Kirk?
Sure.
Okay. Kirk, we have some questions, specific questions, and I'm going to have Felice read them off if she can, and then you can maybe address those and weave whatever else in you'd like to in terms of talking about the salmon. Okay?
Okay. Okay.
Hi, Kirk. This was another question from Darlene, which makes a lot of sense. She was just asking what rationales are presented in the DEIS for not recommending breaching the lower 4 Snake River dams.
Well, they're primarily centered around social and economic costs. They don't refute that the breaching option actually provides the the best benefit for salmon and steelhead populations. So the breaching option acknowledges that has the highest increase in metrics like smolt to adult ratios, which would lead to salmon recovery. So their main you know, their main objection would then be social and economic costs, in their opinion, are higher than the benefits that would be derived to salmon and steelhead by taking out the dams.
Could you talk a little bit more about the effects on smolt to adult return ratios that would be expected both under the alternative that they prefer versus breaching the dams?
Yeah, so so the preferred alternative is really it's really just a minor tweak of what's happening right now. So under an agreement with the states, what's happening now is what they call a flexible spill program. And the trouble with that, I mean, increasing spill at the dams is, you know, does provide benefits because it increases the speed at which salmon can migrate through the reservoirs, past the dams, and then also they avoid going through turbines. The trouble with the flex spill is that it provides the core, the quote-unquote flexibility to spill when hydro values are low. So that usually occurs during the day, and at night there's a higher value for actually running water through the turbines because they can sell it, you know, for more dollars. But fish the juvenile salmon steelhead tend to migrate at night. So under the flex spill, you're actually hurting the fish. They're spilling a lot during the day, but more of the fish are moving at night. So so the benefits of the flex spill are not that great. And under the models, they predict that, well, under one model, under the preferred alternative, you end up with a smolt to adult ratio of less than 1%. And the way you measure that, you know, as to how effective it is, you need to reach 2%. And this is, so the number of smolts that go out and return, so 98% of the, you know, smolt production actually, you know, dies either in freshwater or the ocean. So if you don't get 2% back, you just barely break even. So 1% basically provides you with an extinction path. Under the dam breaching option, the models estimate that the ratio would actually be up around 4 to 5%. So it's double what the preferred alternative is.
Kirk, you mentioned that models indicate that the smolt.
I can't let him in and out.
What's that? Oh, sorry. You mentioned that the models indicate that the smolt to adult return ratios, if they leave under the flex spill plan, wouldn't be sufficient to restore the populations. Does the Army Corps dispute those models?
Did they use them?
Yeah, like do their models say that, or is that a disputed point?
No, that's within the DEIS.
That's
so,
crazy.
Yeah, so they're using, they use two different kinds of models to assess the effect of each of the alternatives on the survival. And they looked at both in-river survival, the adult to smolt ratio, as well as the proportion of fish that might be forced to go through turbines. So they had three sort of metrics. And, you know, they basically, you know, it sort of looks like they're, you know, at the high end, if the flex spill was successful, you'd barely break even. So you sort of maintain the current status of the populations, which are extremely depressed. If you were lucky, you'd just maintain them at these depressed levels. And that's, you know, obviously one of the problems with with the environmental impact statement is that it seems like it doesn't fulfill its legal obligation of actually minimizing threats to the populations.
We had another question. I'm not sure who would be up for answering this, but about what would the effect of breaching the dams be on the groundwater level?
Well, I don't know for sure. My guess would be it would be negligible because it's in a pretty deep canyon.
But something that's come up before, right, is that there's a small number of farms for irrigation where there'll be a significant effect.
This is Deborah. I can speak to that somewhat.
Oh, sorry.
So there's 13 farms on Ice Harbor Reservoir that irrigate about 47,000 acres. So they can and should be mitigated, but you just need to extend their irrigation lines and give them a bigger pump.
Okay.
They can and should be mitigated, but it's easily done. And the Army Corps has come up with some huge estimate of how much it's going to cost. But the engineers who studied it, like Jim Waddell and others, say it can be done for about $20 million, which is a drop in the bucket when we're talking about having blown billions on failed fish passage. So yes, there is a minimal amount of irrigation. It's not much though. And it's very important, one thing to keep in mind about this DEIS is that the agencies studied all 14 federal dams in the Columbia River Basin system. That's why it's called the CROS, Columbia River Operations System. And when I made my comments last week to the Army Corps telephonically, it's really important to focus on the 4 lower Snake River dams. They're always trying to conflate the other dams like Bonneville and John Day and Grand Coulee and say how important those dams are. So they just like to say, oh, these dams are so important. Well, none of us is probably a fan of dams, but Grand Coulee produces 6 times the power of these 4 dams put together. I mean, economically, it's not going anywhere, realistically. And so you need to focus on, in my opinion, just on the 4 lower Snake River dams with a laser focus. Nobody cares about Chief Joseph Dam. Nobody cares about Hungry Horse. I mean, you do, but those aren't the problems. It's the 4 lower Snake River dams that are literally the geographic guillotine cutting off the salmon from this high quality 5,500 miles of habitat in Idaho. The other dams are not the problem.
Since a lot of the Army Corps' rationale seems to be focused on social and economic impacts, like to Lewiston specifically, do we need to discuss that in our comments as well, or do you think that that's best left to others?
Well, I think you can comment them on those in general terms. For example, it seems like the environmental impact statement, really overstates the power generation from the lower Snake dams, and then it seems like it understates the cost of operating those dams as well as the upcoming maintenance and repair that's going to be needed to do both on the dams, the turbines, and the locks, because these are getting old. They're 50. Turbine life is estimated to be anywhere from 35 to 55 years, and a lot of these are near or exceeding their lifetime right now, and yet a lot of that is not accounted for in the cost. Benefits, the DIS didn't really use, they wanted to use qualitative models for estimating benefits to, say, sport fisheries. So they were really narrowly focused on what they considered in terms of generating benefits. On the other hand, when they were assessing the cost and benefits of things like irrigation transportation, power generation, they went ahead and used, both a mix of qualitative and quantitative models. So it seems like they had two different methods that results in an underestimate of what the effects on fishing, recreation, and economic benefits to rural communities would be by breaching dams versus, the really what I consider inflated cost of taking them out.
And I just want to say something that shocked me when I first learned about this, about cost. And I've heard $15–16 billion, whatever this number is, that we've spent trying to save these salmon and keep the dams. And whenever we talk about money, that number kind of makes everything else seem like nothing. And we obviously are continuing to do that. I mean, one of the things that I found amazing was that we actually take these fish down the river in a barge. I mean, they are driven in a giant aquarium boat to try to get them past these dams to try to save them. And again, it doesn't work. So, money upon money has been spent on those kind of things. And anything that we need to do to, deal with the breaching the dam problem is small potatoes, I think, compared to what we spent on trying to unsuccessfully save these salmon.
Yeah, I always say, just as a kind of a thumbnail, breach the dams, you save salmon, save southern resident orcas, save money, and save tribal rights, which are hugely important to the impacted tribes. There's a whole appendix, and if you're really into some interesting reading, Appendix P has verbatim letters from all the affected tribes, the Warm Springs, Nez Perce, and it's heartbreaking but extremely interesting reading. And it's relatively short. It's only 96 pages compared to a lot of the rest of it. The whole DEIS is almost 8,000 pages.
That's the appendix on the DEIS?
Yeah, that's got appendixes A through V, and the tribal perspectives is P as in Peter.
Okay, I'll link that if I can dig it up real quick.
Yeah, I also have that in PDF I can send you.
Okay.
Hey, I printed off so much stuff from this. I will say it's very hard to work through. If you can get a hard copy, that's the way to do it. Doing electronically is a real piece of work.
And anybody, please chime in with questions, or if as you're writing your comment, you come up with questions that you feel like, oh, I wish I knew quite how to phrase this. I think just here to help. So we had.
Am I muted?
No, I can hear you. Oh wait, now I can't hear you.
Okay. So we're submitting these comments. They have to be submitted by Monday. You can do it if they're small enough, as we learned today, online at the website of the Columbia River, whatever that, crso.com. And, or you can just write a letter and mail it. It just has to be postmarked by Monday at 5. And Felice, are you giving the address, or there's a link that has all the addresses and where to send your information. Again, we are also, the Broads have done an 80-page comment that's being sent under our national, under Shelley's signature, and Deborah worked on that, and some other, various other Broads worked on that. So that's great. And so that's in, we'll be putting that out if people want to read that and take comments from that. That dealt with freight transportation, orcas, and salmon. There are parts we didn't deal with just because of taking on so much. So we're going to also be sending that out to politicians, copies with a cover letter from the Broads, because we're hoping the politicians are becoming more aware of this. For instance, apparently the Oregon-Washington delegation, at least the Democrats, have asked for an extension of this time given the crisis that we're in. And I will not bore you with the story of me trying to hand deliver a copy of this today to a building that is locked tighter than a safe. After getting 2 security guards and various other things, I finally got someone to accept this hand-delivered document. So it may be, we may have an extension coming up, so you might have more time, but next Monday is the deadline at this point.
Jane also, I think, had a question. Jane?
Maybe being too delicate, but I wondered about how we would present ourselves as Oregon citizens having an interest in this. If, you know, I know that you often talk in comments like these about how you benefit from the right working of things, and as this seems to be a Washington concern, how do we present ourselves as having an interest in it?
I can take a first stab for what I was thinking, that the salmon populations and the precipitous drop-off definitely is obviously a regional issue that affects all of us in the Pacific Northwest, and the Columbia River Basin's a shared resource. And so I was thinking of going with that angle, that the survival of wild salmon is part of our Pacific Northwest heritage. I mean, I guess I'm from Illinois, but my new heritage, and that under those auspices, it is of vital interest to all of us. But other folks might have other thoughts.
Well, more directly, there are several major northeast Oregon rivers that flow into the Snake River above all 4 dams. So you have the Grand Ronde, Minam, and Naha rivers, which used to produce lots and lots of salmon. So there is a direct Oregon interest in breaching the dams.
Kirk, could you repeat the rivers just so I can get this into a comment? 4 major Oregon rivers.
Yeah, there's the Grand Ronde, which includes Minam, Wallowa rivers, and Naha River.
Okay.
So those are major salmon streams in northeast Oregon.
Thank you.
And I can have a follow-up comment too. As an Oregon citizen, you're paying taxes to support these obsolescent dams that are killing our native creatures, including the salmon and the southern resident orcas, which are known to hang off the mouth of the Columbia for considerable times. And they're right off the mouth of the Columbia there. So Oregon citizens are sort of a beneficiary of those southern resident orcas being out there. Also, BPA rates are higher than they should be because of having to deal with the fish and wildlife mitigation costs for these dams. So if you have a BPA contract with your local utility, which a lot of people do in the Northwest, you're paying higher rates, and they're going to keep going up because of these dams.
Yes, and increased salmon populations in the Columbia itself, as they're swimming through the Columbia up into Idaho, would benefit Oregon tribes as well as sport fisheries. So, you know, there's definitely Oregon interest specifically here as well as regionally.
Hi, this is Kathy. I've got a question. On the information on the tribal rights in the Appendix P, and just wondering if the analysis and if they've done the cost-benefit analysis that can hold water on what the tribes are concerned about.
Well, I don't know that specifically. I know that there are tribes, you know, the Nez Perce in particular has been a co-litigant with the state of Oregon in suing for a more proactive and a salmon plan that actually has salmon recovery as a objective, rather than just sort of the status quo where populations are kept at a declining level. So I know that the Nez Perce in particular are pushing for the breaching option.
Yeah, my reading of Appendix P about the tribal input, and if you have the interest, I really do encourage folks to read Appendix P. The tribes are really concerned about their treaty rights and being able to fish as they could in the 1855 baseline, the year the treaty was signed. They feel like they are losing their treaty rights, not being able to fish in usual and accustomed places. Also, they have tremendous numbers of cultural sites and sacred sites that were covered up by the reservoirs that are very troublesome to the tribes. So it's really affected their whole culture. They make comments something like they really can't even put a monetary value on the loss of salmon because it was so central to their way of life. And the DEIS actually says that the loss to the tribes is really incalculable, but they just kind of say, so what, we're gonna go with this little bit of power, and keeping the navigation is more important than these tribal rights and the terrible impacts on the tribal citizens. The Shoshone-Bannock tribe also expressly advocates for breaching the 4 lower Snake River dams.
Okay. Yeah, if you can't calculate it, you can just ignore it, right? Isn't that how it works?
In our society, the dominant society, I'd say yes, unfortunately.
You said Shoshone-Bannock. Can you remind me how to spell that?
Shoshone, SHOSHONE -BANNOCK. They're the furthermost tribe to the east, so they've been the most ferociously impacted by these dams.
Got it.
Other questions? Comments?
Get your comments in. And I think we are kind of trying to keep track at least a little bit of how many broads comments we get submitted. So if you do get a chance to ping your broadband leaders when you submit a comment or copy us, I think it'd be great to sort of know the impact and input that the broadbands are having on the process.
We want to flood the agency with comments, so have at it. What else do you have to do right now?
So you said we may be able to see the larger Great Old Broads comments while we're writing these. When might that be available?
I'm figuring out how we should get it out. It's kind of a large file. I'd like to see it posted on the Broads website, so I'm working on that. But I'm happy to send it to anybody individually who wants to send me their email. My email is just my name, MICKYRYAN@AOL.com.
We could also put it on the Google Drive for the broadband, if that was easier too.
Okay.
Distribute the link, like a shareable link.
Okay. Okay.
All right, cool.
Well, thank you all for doing this and participating. I think it's been a really nice number of people, and it's great to see your faces, as I said, and hear your voices. So hopefully we'll do it again. Please let us know if you have comments or suggestions for next time. That would be great.
I have one quick question before we're over. Is there a way to access what Felice put into the chat box once we close out the meeting?
Yeah, I can save the chat now, and then I'll just make it into a better document, and I can send that out to the broadband leaders, I guess. Mickey, is that the best way to get it out?
Yeah, I think so. Well, I've tried to write down the names of everybody that I know here too. And we can try to get it out that way too, to individuals that are on this call.
And if you're on a computer right now, I think if you go to the chat, I think that you can save the chat yourself too if you wanted.
Yes, you can.
Okay.
Ah,
Yeah.
okay.
So,
Where the three little dots are, click that and it gives you the option and you can save it.
so if that's easier for you, but we'll try to like neaten them
Great.
up a little bit and send them out as well.
Cool, that's great.
Excellent.
All right, cool.
Okay, thanks so much, everybody.
Thanks
I want to
especially
thank all of you for organizing this, and to our speakers and so forth. It was really helpful.
yeah. Yeah, big thanks to Deborah and Kirk for providing their, and Mickey, obviously, for providing expertise.
So just coming into this issue, it's really helpful to have some of the expertise of people who've been at this for a long time and with a lot of information. So thank you.
Great.
Thanks so much for coming.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a good night. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.